Everybody. I'm Jonathan Curry. So good day, everybody. My name is Jonathan Curry. Today we'll be meeting about orthography, and the idea here is to gain an understanding of what these sounds and symbols mean when you're reading the Autham language. So hopefully, as students, or as teachers, parents, and as students of the language, you'll be able to really take the control of learning into your own hands instead of having to depend on someone else consistently. Now, I want to be clear that working with a fluent speaker is essential to picking up the language if you're going to gain an understanding of it to hopefully build to fluency. But with that being said, we do live in a modern world where we all have jobs, we all have responsibilities, we're always busy, we're always moving on to the next thing and trying to take care of the next thing. And so in our own private time, there's that time to work on the language, practice on our own or with a family member or family, and then bounce that off of a speaker. And say, hey, I read this, or hey, I learned to say like this, does that make sense? Or, just finding somebody who's patient to work with you and to help you along in your learning. Me myself, I'm a learner. I've been learning language for about 8 years now, about 9 years. And so I haven't gained a fluent understanding of the language. When I hear speakers speak, if they talk like this, I can gain an understanding of them. But most speakers aren't willing to, say, yeah, could you slow it down a little bit? They think, oh yeah, I'm like, okay, yeah. So another tip as a learner, that's what I'll be sharing today, is tips as a learner through all the years that I've been learning, is, really slow down your hearing as well. Is really, when they speak to you, take the time to listen and say, again, say it again. And then, listen, intently to what they're saying. And so that's the opening for this series here. And we'll be sharing some material. I've gained a lot of language material through my travels as a language learner, and so I'll be sharing that with everyone who participates sometime next week. So we'll send it out. But next slide, please. And so, kind of zooming out from our respective community here in Salt River, understanding, and that's kind of what we'll be going through in this presentation, is an understanding of dialects, the orthography itself, and then also linguists, understanding of orthography and attempts of early orthography systems in terms of Autham language. And so if we zoom out from our linguistic family, we're part of what's known as the Uto-Aztecan language. The most closest language branch to our own as Autham is the Tepejano language, which is down here in near central Mexico. And it's a Durango area. There's still villages there that speak, where elders have traveled there from our community here, and so I can understand what they're saying, and I have some videos of that as well, them speaking to each other. They also identify themselves as Autham people. But moving in closer to where we are here, you can see, from the tip down all the way to the very northern tip. This is where we are in the Phoenix area. So we're very much on the opposite end of this kind of closely related language family. And next to ours, as far as Akimat Autham, Thon Autham dialects, would have to be the Pima Bajo, or they call themselves the Autham, which is more in the mountains here in northern Mexico, Pima Bajo, Mountain Pimas, and they're probably languages far more closer than ours today, or at least historically, traditionally. There are some interesting linguistic ties, blatant linguistic ties that we cannot ignore. One example would be that I found very interesting recently was when we talk about a common raven, the bird, we as Autham, Thon Autham, Akimat Autham, identify that bird as a havan. But down there in the Autham territory, the Pima Bajo territory, they identify it as Ko'okoin. And so when they use that term, this is a term that has historically popped up within our documented language, particularly within stories of creation and old speeches to do with the calling of the rain, and also war speeches. And so, it points to a very old style and a very obvious linguistic tie between us as northern O'odham people, and then down towards the south in northern Mexico, what they identify themselves as O'odham. And so, next slide, please. And so, as we zoom in even closer to where we are here in the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, we go to our most closest language relative, which is the O'odham, and we identify them as our sibling tribe because we pretty much believe all the same things, speak the same manner, practice all of the same ceremonies and cultures. We're pretty much the same people. But when we talk about language, dialect, there are slight differences of that. But one interesting thing that I learned when I started learning language from O'odham people was the diverse amount of dialects within their community. And so within the O'odham nation, there's 11 dialects, and all of these dialects have specific words that may sound a bit different, but basically have kind of the same sounds and understanding. One example, a teacher I had from O'odham nation, she was saying, yeah, this is a picture of my body. And I was like, oh, cool. And she's like, yeah, my grandpa. And I was like, oh, right on. And I was like, you guys are pretty close, huh? You call them your buddy? She's like, no, that's what we call him, our body. That's our ECEC term, our term for our relation, my maternal grandfather. I was like, oh, okay, we say Bob or Baba. And she goes, oh, yeah, that's right, yeah, but we say body. And so I was like, oh, okay, so it's not very different, but there are slight differences where when you hear it, initially you're kind of like, what was that? But, it's still discernible, especially when you're already speaking with somebody and they're able to communicate. Oh yeah, it's a little different, but this is what we're saying. And so, next slide, please. And so, again, zooming in closer, within O'odham territory, and we have to acknowledge here in Salt River our undeniable tie to the Gila River Indian community. Salt River itself is very much, kind of from a time perspective, very much a young community. And so as far as this community being established on a permanent basis, in a large form, that didn't happen until very recent times, and it was really because of the Gila River drying up. And a lot of these villages within the Gila River community moved here to Lehigh and Salt River. And so when we talk about O'odham, and so we're O'odham dialect, so when we talk about O'odham dialect, there's really only two discernible dialects that are acknowledged by elders, what they call the Ta'i O'odham, which is the upriver or eastern O'odham, and then the Cuiva O'odham, which is the western or downriver O'odham. And so that's very much where this line is, District 6 basically, and then kind of the rest. And as the dialects kind of travel to the east, they kind of differ, but there are some different linguistic words that are utilized that kind of fall into that dialect realm. And so, next slide. And so when we talk about this class, and again, I want to touch on a little bit kind of my history here in Salt River is, again, we had villages come in large amounts to permanently settle this area. Before that time, it was very much, there's evidence of seasonal farming here, settlements, and some semi-permanent settlements where they were settled here for maybe a year or two or maybe even longer, and then they moved kind of to Gila River and then come back and forth. And so, when we talk about Salt River dialect, and last class on Tuesday we had the CRD manager sit in, and he had something important to share, was that, as far as written orthography, Salt River has adopted its own kind of what would you call it, Alvarez Hale but kind of modified Alvarez Hale system. And so when we talk about our language as a whole, with these villages from different parts of the Indian community coming here, but also families kind of tracking their lineage to the Dalmatha Nation, and then also the history between the 1900s and the 1960s of kind of these work camps where their families would work on farms in different areas, whether that be like, Florence area, Coolidge, Ajo area, mines, all these different various areas within the Arizona area where, not only was it Ottoman people traveling to these places, but it was various tribes and peoples, ethnic groups, African Americans, people of Hispanic descent, Mexican Americans, Yaqui people, and within these work villages, kind of a mixing of people. But that's what we're seeing here when we talk about our language and our dialect here in Salt River. It's kind of a mix of all these various Ottoman dialects. And so one rule of thumb that people often talk about is, well, here in Salt River, Akhenaten, we use the V sound, while in Dalmatha they use the W sound. It's kind of, words kind of go back and forth. It's a good rule of thumb, but it's not always the case, particularly when we talk about Akhenaten dialect. Kind of, some words go with the V, some will go with the W. And so the point I'm trying to make is that when we talk about dialect, always have an open mind. And so as you learn more dialects, this really expands your learning and understanding of Ottoman language. But always have that open mind, that open heart, to be able to accept these things like, oh, I never heard it like that. Like, okay, look, kind of put a little tab in your mind, like, I'll go back to that, or I'll look into that, like, maybe that's something that, again, gaining all of this knowledge can definitely help you help those that are around you, whether that be your family, friends, or other people who may have an interest but having trouble kind of connecting. And so we have these books here, and I recommend these books. The additional material that I sent was from this Dalmatha grammar book by Ophelia Zapeta. The reason I use that one, because not only is it very simple, but it's also, these books are the most accessible. You can literally go on Amazon and buy these right now. Books that are very similar, although this one is a dictionary book, purely words, and this was more of a grammar book, kind of came out around the same time, but both use different orthographies. When we talk about Dean and Lucille Saxton, they created their own orthography, while Dr. Ophelia Zapeta uses the Alvarez Hale orthography. And so a little bit of history of Alvarez Hale orthography, created by Dr. Kenneth Hale and Albert Alvarez, who was a Dalmatha man. And then Dean Saxton himself was a missionary, went into the Dalmatha Nation to preach the word of God, and was having trouble communicating with people. And so he met a family and said, I want to learn the language. They said, we'll teach you, but you have to live with us. And so he lived with them for months on end, learning the language. And he created this book and a good amount of additional material as well that he put out that's really great. But although they're two different orthographies, definitely can go hand in hand, but that's what we're talking about, is how to discern the orthographies and understand them. And so, next slide, please. And so, different from the last class, I think we better just get right into the meat of it. And kind of, when we talk about orthography, that's essentially the sounds that these symbols are making, the letters. And so, a good trick is that when you're looking at these letters, you want to associate them with a sound or a word within a word. Now, all of these are English examples of words where they make these sounds. Something that helped me as a learner was associating these sounds with Ottoman words, and so that might be something to build up to. And so the A always, and these are always, these letters and symbols are set in stone. These are always the sounds that they make. And so A, ah as in father or all, and then B, big, and then the C makes a ch sound as in chip, and then the D makes a this as in the, and then a D with a dot underneath makes a t sound, t as in but. So the T in but. And then the E makes a oo sound or a sound. So hum, um, um, um. And then the G makes a G sound as in go. And the H makes a H sound as in hat. And the I makes an E sound as in machine. The J makes a J sound as in job. And the K makes a K sound as in kiss. Interestingly enough, you'll see when people write it out, they'll kind of interchange the G and the K. Because when you're speaking it, it kind of sounds the same. You can't really discern the difference. But then we have the L sound, which they point out doesn't really have a English equivalent. The closest would be like a rolling R in Spanish, and here they have the D as in ladder, and so it's a simple roll of the tongue. It's not a continuous roll of the tongue, not a r, but a ra, ra, ra. Then we have the M as in miss, the N as in no, and then the N with the little squiggly on top, the Spanish N as in as in canyon, an. And then we have the next one, which is an N with like a little hook at the end. This is very much a symbol that you'll plainly see only within Donna Autumn, Alvarez Hale forms. It's rarely a sound you hear within Autumn dialect, but it's because a lot of those words come from Spanish loans. And so as in finger. And so, but interestingly enough, when we talk about that sound, it is a sound that you hear a lot within Autumn songs, within traditional songs. Then we have the O as in all, autumn. And then the P as in pot. Then we have the S as in sea. And then the S with a dot underneath as in shh, be quiet. Ship. And then we have the T as in top. And then we have the U as in brute. Then the W as in wing. And then we have one that's missing, which is really Autumn dialect, is the V as in my cousin Vinny. And then Y as in yes. And so this is the simple breakdown of these letters. As you see Alvarez Hale written, and even as you start to gain an understanding of this orthography, you still start to associate these symbols or comparative symbols to these sounds. This is definitely a good base to have. But again, it's an attempt in your own mind to memorize these sounds and associating with them with these letters, so that when you're reading it, just like when you're in elementary school, they say sound it out. That's how you pick up the language, especially reading, is you want to take it slow. And so read it slow, but even more so when you're saying it out loud, say it slow. And so often I've noticed when I've done language classes and I'll share with somebody a phrase, they'll try to repeat it and it kind of get jumbled together. And so it's like, always remind yourself, you're still a beginner. Take it slow, because then you yourself are making sure your pronunciation's correct and that your tongue is kind of making those sounds that are appropriate. Because that's the thing. And one of the biggest lessons I learned from a teacher here, she in the language class, she was saying, I was having trouble saying a word that she was trying to teach me, and we were going for like 2 hours, and my mouth was all cramped up, and she's like, it's okay, this language, it's different than English. Like you need to use different muscles in your mouth. She said, so it's okay, just give your mouth muscles time to grow. She said, because, if you think about it, she said, English is a lazy language. When you're speaking English, your tongue's just laying in your mouth. She said, but when you're speaking Autumn, you gotta roll it, and you gotta place it at certain places and all these different things. She said, so give yourself time. So next slide. And so next is what they call diphthongs. And diphthongs is essentially just a combination of vowels with the letter I. And so when you're pronouncing diphthongs, you still want to do the same thing, just pronounce the first vowel with the I. And so AI is I as in bite, and then EI as is ui, and then OI is oi, or oi as in boy, and then UI is ui as in gooey. And so although they separate them linguistically and label them diphthongs, they're still, there's still the same sounds that you have to make. There's not really any differentiating sounds, different sounds that you're making. And so next slide, please. And so this is kind of getting into the meat of it as well, as we get into these special symbols. And so first focusing in on long vowels is when you see a long vowel, that just means you hold that vowel sound longer. And so instead of a ah, it's a ah. And then you just hold it. So mahina, vernak, ve, o, us. And so in the Alvarez Hale system, they symbol or they signify a long vowel with a colon. So when you see a colon in Alvarez Hale, that means to extend that vowel. This colon should only become, grammatically, when we speak grammatically, this colon should only come after vowels. And then when we talk about Saxon and Saxton, their long vowels are symbolized with the vowel, with the H. So same thing, same sound, same everything, but when you see a H after the vowel, that symbolizes a long vowel. And I added this myself. This is referencing Harry Winters Jr. and Amadeo Ray, who really have very good publications about various topics, writing about Ottoman history and culture. But what they do, and really it's Harry Winters himself, what he does is to signify a long vowel, he'll double the vowel. And so that signifies a long vowel. And so we have all these example words, they're all said the same way, but they're essentially written differently. And although Amadeo Ray in his early writings didn't use this type of long vowel writing system, it is something he's adopted in his current writings. So it's something you will see in reference to his writings. And I know Harry Winters is coming up with a grammar book soon, and so this will be something that you will see if you utilize that publication as a resource. And so these are basically the majority of different styles that you'll see of long vowels. And then as far as our dialect here is in Salt River, really the only short vowel you'll see is the I with the little, what they call a breathe. And when you see a breathe, the way I learned it and stuck it in my mind as far as becoming familiar with it is associating the word breathe with the word breathe, to breathe, because that's all you're doing when you're saying a breathed I, is you're exhaling out. Oof, oof. And so the same goes for all of these other breathed vowels. You're still breathing out with that vowel. And so taha, ha, vopa. And so it really doesn't change the sound as far as the vowel that's underneath this breathe, but the breathe represents a breath out. But this is the one that you'll see most common. You don't really see other breathed vowels within Akhimaratham orthography writings. But just understand that when you see this breathed I, it's an exhale, like that. And so what are some other examples of breathed I's? I don't have any on top of my head, but moving on, and there will be other examples further on. And then moving on, these are all the other symbols that we already covered those. And then next slide, please. And so I thought it would be beneficial to kind of go over some of the sounds that are a little different than what we make or used to associating with English. And this animation here is a bisection of someone's mouth. They just took an x-ray and they watched their tongue, where they placed their tongue. So this is the tongue here, and then this is the nose and the top of the jaw, the bottom of the jaw. And so the point of this is to see where a person places their tongue when they're making these sounds. And so the D is the, as in father, there, this, they're placing the tip of the tongue at the front of the teeth, here. So we have the lips and then the teeth and the tongue. And so some awesome examples of that would be words would be dwag, tak, id. And so next slide. And a very similar sound, but the only difference between the D and the T in the orthography system is that there is no vocal cord reverberation. And so the tongue is still at the tip of the mouth, or at the front of the mouth behind the teeth. The tip of the tongue is still at the front of the mouth behind the teeth. So it's thin, thousand, moth. And so there's no reverberation here. Thin, thousand, moth. Instead of there, this. So that's the only difference when you see the T, is you're keeping that TH sound at the front of the mouth, essentially. Okay, next slide. Oh, let me go over the autumn word. So we have tosh, mitor, and gardet. And so next we have the D with the dot underneath, which is very much just a T sound, a hard T. And you can see them here have the tip of their tongue at the very front of the roof of the mouth. So we have hot, cot, but. So for the often words we have mat, tichivikut, and so you're keeping that tongue at the front of the very tip of the roof of the mouth. And so next slide. And so this is one that you don't really see a lot within Tona Autumn Alvarez Hale systems. But it is an important sound. And it is one that you see within Ankh-Akimat Autumn dialect, is the hard D, as in do, dog, dot. And so that's a D with a dot, or a line underneath, sorry. But same thing, tongue at the tip of the mouth, or tip of the roof of the mouth, hard D, da, 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 da. Instead of a ta, ta, it's a da, da, da. You're adding that reverberation. And so, one that you rarely see within written systems, but still very important. You should see more of this. Okay, next one. Oh, I forgot to go over the author word, sorry. So we have Judam, Erda, and Erdai. And then this is probably one of the harder ones, is that rolling R. But you can see here they have the tongue at the roof of the mouth flicking forward. Ra, 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 riar, ari, akimar. And so keep in mind when you're saying akimar that you're saying ak, which is a wash, and then imar, to run. So consistently running wash, i.e. a river, akimarata. And so a simple roll of the tongue forward. Okay, next slide. And so this is the one that's given me the most trouble in my learning journey. And this particular piece of literature helped me a lot to understand where I was going wrong in my pronunciation. So that's why I decided to put in this presentation, to add that visual aid as to where your tongue should be. But the anya sound. And notice all the examples are Spanish. I don't know Spanish. Señor. Oh, I know baño. So you want to place kind of the center of the tongue, or even the back of the tongue, or the front of the tongue. At the roof of the mouth, kind of the middle of the tongue, nyok, poing. Yeah, kind of the mid front of the tongue. And so to this day, I'll be practicing with my wife, and she'll say, "No, you're not saying it right. You've always had trouble with that sound." It's like, well, I'm trying, like. And so, it's a struggle for me still to this day, and I have to consciously think, where am I placing my tongue as I speak? And so again, I have to slow down and try it again. It's like, onion, York. And so it's still, I still need a lot of practice, honestly. And so next slide.
How do you say that last
Corn. Yeah. Corn. Yeah, that's corn. Corn. And then again, this is the sound that you rarely see, but the example here on the word is chango, which is a monkey. Again, a Spanish borrowed word. But again, interestingly enough, you don't see it in written autumn, but you hear it a lot in songs. We got these interesting sounds that you don't always make in spoken language in songs. So next slide. And so no use for a visual aid. These are very much sounds that we make in English every day. Ch. Always keep that in mind, the C. And that's the other thing that you'll see, particularly in Saxton, but also I believe Harry Winter's writing as well, is they'll keep it CH. So when you see that will be the difference between the two, is just a C by itself and a CH, still making the ch sound. The CH is no different, ch. But Alvarez Hale, they cut the H out and just leave it C. So ch here, chama, hastru. And then we have the S with the dot underneath, sh, as in sheep, wish, shine. And so we have shushk, which are your shoes, ha shine, cactus, and dash, skut dash. And so next slide. And so this one I thought was important to add. The visual aid is kind of creepy to me, but glottal stops. So glottal stops are the comma in autumn orthographies. And when you see that, that literally means to stop the sound that's coming out of your mouth. So one English example is when we say uh-oh, is that uh-oh, that stop, that's a glottal stop. And so some autumn words that represent glottal stops would be mo'o, ma'ak, ge'ik. So you're literally closing your throat and you're stopping all sound and air coming out. That's what's considered a glottal stop. And again, another essential thing to understand as far as understanding the autumn language and understanding what you're reading, because another good rule of thumb in terms of pluralizing autumn words is to double the first syllable, and often that double syllable comes with a glottal stop. Not always the case, but a good rule of thumb to have as a learner, as basic understanding. And so, next slide, please. And so this was at the end of this piece of material that I had. And it's not something, until I was doing research for this presentation, it's something that I entirely noticed. But they talk about the stress, where you put the stress of the words when you're speaking. And they're saying here that some words, autumn words, have the stresses at the end of the word. And those are often borrowed words. And those, that's not anything, there's no rule to that or anything that you can really, as far as understanding linguistically or from an orthography standpoint, it's just something that you have to learn as you go. So, mergan, kovi. But when they said that, I was like, oh, okay, I never really noticed. I never really focused on the stresses of words. But then I have this example of different body parts. And when I started reading it, kind of with that stress at the beginning, I started to realize, like, oh, that's important. Because when you hear speakers speak, they are putting the stress at the beginning of the word. So, no, sish, mashma, mamsh, walk, hick, hoda, or, gomp, chur, And so you're hearing that stress, and the rest of the sounds after that initial stress kind of fall off. And so, little interesting point there, as far as practicing and becoming more of as far as sound, more of a clearer, more fluent speaker, practicing those stresses as well. And so, again, when they pointed us out here, I didn't really hear the stress on Maragon, Govi, when you hear it, when you read it, or when you say it, or when speakers say it. Next slide, please. And so, I have to acknowledge early linguists when we talk about orthography and their contribution to what we have today. And so, interestingly enough, some of the earliest linguists to attempt to write our language were both Othan men. Juan Dolores from the village of Valmedy in the Tohono Nation, and then we have Jose Brenneman Lewis from the village of Vinum Cook. Interestingly enough, although they were from the Tohono Nation, they very much had interaction with people in the Gila River Indian community, Akimaroth, Salt River. Jose Brenneman Lewis had a large hand in the publication that's very popular, 1901, Pima Indians by Frank Russell. If you ever read that book, you can see a lot of the O'odham words that they're writing. It's very much influenced by his writing system that he created. Both of these men were products of boarding school, and when they came out of boarding school, they used what they learned and basically became academics. And when we talk about Juan Dolores, we talk about a man who basically dedicated his entire life to preserving and learning to write, or creating a writing system that would preserve our people's language. And he stayed permanently at what was then called the Museum of Man. Now it's called the Museum of Us at the University of San Diego. Had an important hand in documenting or recording a number of Tohono songs and speeches and just all kinds of interesting things. But there's stories of him locking himself in his room for weeks on end, just documenting, writing out the language. Then we have, of course, Dean Saxton, who's this, Saxton and Saxon orthography is accredited to. We have Madeline Mathiot, whose dictionary, trying to remember the name of the dictionary. I think it's just Tohono Dictionary, but it was originally published in 1971, and she wrote her own orthography for that dictionary, and then it kind of traveled through different universities, different groups who were attempting to take her orthography and update it to the Alvarez Hale Orthography. Eventually it got done. It's one of the most thorough dictionaries out there. It's just out of print and not publicly available as far as like mainstream wise. You can't just Google it and find it. But I'll get you guys a copy so we all have it. Large amount of words, endless amount of words. These words have examples of sentences, so you get examples of how to use these words within sentences. Single and plural forms. It's extremely extensive and a great resource to have as a learner. And so then we have, of course, Dr. Ken Hale and Albert Alvarez. And we have Dr. Ophelia Zapata, who, of course, published the Tohono Grammar book, a number of other publications focused on her poems. Very humble and caring woman. We have the late Nanny Lopez, first O'odham man to write his entire dissertation in the O'odham language. He's an extremely humble person and gave everything he had. There was literally no question off limits for this man. Extremely humble person, and really shared as much as he could, not only with our own people, but whoever had an interest, he would share. And so next slide, please. And so here we have this sign from the school here, the various classrooms. And like I mentioned before, the last class, the manager for the language program came on and said there are a few mistakes in here. We're working to correct them. And so I'm glad that they're working to update these signs and have more of a hand in what we see every day within our community as far as our written language. But I did take a few examples of of these classroom signs and kind of gave you an idea of writing systems throughout history, the history of attempting to write these languages, our language, and how they differ. And so we have Jose Bredeman Lewis, who was a man before I had shared. You can see for here with the deer, why, he wrote it in this fashion. It's a dictionary. It's essentially just a long list, but it's also a dictionary, but it's all handwritten. And then we have Frederick Grossman and Charles Cook. Frederick Grossman was a German man, and he was the special agent, Indian agent for the Healer of Indian community for a short time. When the Presbyterian missionary Charles Cook came in, he asked Grossman, "Do you have any language written down? Anything help you, learn the language?" He said, "Sure." So he gave him his dictionary he had, and Charles Cook just basically slapped his name on it. So you'll find it within archive material that they're different, but they're the same. They're the same thing. And so we have Antonine Willenbrook, early missionary. That's another example of the earliest forms of attempting to write our language, or missionaries that came in. And then, so with this one, this is an example, so we have Y here, and then here, which is Mathiat, we have a Y with a V. And it's interesting because the person that she worked, or the people that she worked with to write this dictionary, were from the Tongan Nation, but with their dialect, they strictly use the V, no W's at all. And so it's an interesting thing to understand that when people say, "Oh, well, you guys use the D, you use W," I feel like you're focusing on the wrong stuff. Like, well, VW, who cares, man? Just learn the language. So, next slide. The point being is there's various ways you'll see this written. And then here's one where we have a long vowel, but that isn't a vowel. So one that needs to be corrected. And as far as that, that's where you start to see, and I prefer the Alvarez Hale system. That's why I wanted to do this training, is because it's extremely thorough. All the sounds in autumn that you hear, you're going to see it represented within the Alvarez Hale system. But there are, although the Dean Saxton is the other one opposing that's most widely available, there are faults within the system, and this is exactly where that lies. And so we have the bumblebee, puhundak, and then we have abbreviated I. Saxton is Saxton's dictionary does not differentiate between a spoken I and a breathed I, and so you get puhundaki. And that's when you hear, when you're meeting other learners and you're speaking to people, they say, "Oh yeah, shudaki." It's like, oh, that doesn't sound right, shudak. But you kind of get an understanding of where they're picking up the language from. Is likely the Saxton is Saxton dictionary. And so huhodaki isn't correct, it would be huhodak. And that's the other example with that I wanted to touch on with Mathiat, is that you'll see different symbols than within the Alvarez Hale, but they're representing the Alvarez Hale sounds. I imagine what it was is that the typewriter or the program they're using just couldn't make these symbols, and so they used an equivalent. And so that's something as well you kind of have to be flexible with.
Could it be though too that in Saxton, because he was in 69, well, it's not too far between 73, but they didn't have that slur, but she's using the dot, that's why he didn't add that in, or maybe he wasn't a linguistic person because he was more Christianity.
Well, but this was when it was originally published. This example here is from a 1983 publication. And then this one here with Mathiat, although it was originally published in 1973, when it was published in 1973, it didn't look like this at all. She was completely different. It was her own creative orthography. And so, like I said, from then to now, it switched different hands, and eventually we got this product here. And there was basically groups of college students that kind of took on this project. And so that's the only thing I can think of is like, it might be just because like even today, trying to type this stuff, you have a hard time. You honestly have to download a program to kind of get the breathed eyes and different things. And so, next slide. And so same thing here, same example, but interesting. We have Thol, and then we have the way Jose Brenneman spelt it. Very interesting. His focus on grammatical symbols. But again, when you read, if you ever pick up Frank Russell's Pima Indians, you kind of see that overload of grammatical symbols. And then again, Frederick Grossman was a German man, and so this J at the end represents an H sound. That was his equivalent as far as writing German. And so Thol. And so that's something you'll see sometimes too, is they'll kind of put in a J, like almost like a Spanish J, Juan. See that as well sometimes. But then you have again Dolby. So it's just consistently throughout, you have these, you don't have a differentiation. So without any sort of clear differentiation, how is the learner supposed to understand I should be making this sound without speaking to somebody and then of course them saying, that isn't right. And sometimes they don't put it that way, they make you feel bad. Next one. And so I left this slide here for any questions. If there are any questions.
In Phono-Autumn, how would they pronounce Judum since they don't use like the hard D?
Judum. So Judum. Yeah. And that's the other thing as well, is when we talk about dialect, there's people that say Judum and then Judum. Yeah. And so that's one example of dialect. It's very small, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you still understand me, right? And so that's why the whole reason I put this together as well was because speaking to teachers, speaking to learners, like, I've seen it written 1,000 different ways. I don't know if I'm saying it right. People say, oh, it's dialect. People will scream at me and say, I'm not saying it right, all these different things. An old lady scared me, I don't know. You know what I mean? But I understand that. I've been through all of that, you know what I mean? But the point that I'm trying to communicate here is that our problems are big if you make them big, And so if you want to purely focus on dialect, if you want to purely focus on if it's written wrong or right, you're focusing on the wrong things. And the point is just to learn the language as much as you can. Because in all honesty, the clock is ticking. We don't have a lot of time with elders, fluent speakers, to save and preserve these things. And something that had an immense impact on me and made me very sad was we had a community member meeting, and there was a mention of Peeposh and how many fluent speakers of Peeposh existed today. And the director of CRD had said, well, it depends on how you define fluent, which is true. Fluencies, there's the academic fluency, there's actual common language fluency. It just depends what do you mean by that, And so he was saying, say 10, 12 years ago, we made a list of all the speakers in Salt River or Lehigh of Peeposh. Now there's only one speaker, or they came up with 12 speakers, and now there's only one left of those speakers today. And so it made me very sad that we're seeing our language, as they say, go to sleep. And, it's hard to watch. But as an O'odham cultural practitioner and an O'odham language enthusiast, I see that as very much our same plight. And honestly, they say 4 to 5 languages, indigenous languages, die across the world each year. And so I honestly think about these things, and I wonder, the system is built for our languages to die. That is undeniable. It's just a question of when is that going to happen. That's the bottom line. That's the ugly truth. Is it going to happen next year, or is it going to happen in 100 years, or 200 years? As we have these larger conglomerate languages, English, Spanish, whatever they may be, taking over all of these indigenous language communities, and they're letting go of their language. So I don't think the moral or the end of the story is completely gloom and doom. You know, I think about all these elders before us who basically dedicated their lives to preserve our culture and our language. They aren't here anymore, but people like us are. And so these people who have this shared spirit, this shared strength and motivation, you know, we're moving through generations. I never met them, but I understand what they did, why they did it. I'm continuing that work. Hopefully this continues on. So for when I'm gone, there'll be people there to pick it up and still have this same passion. That's the hope. And to be honest with you, I don't think that passion will ever die, but it's about the resources that those people in the future have. And so, will my kids be able to help them if I'm not here anymore? So on and so forth. That's the thing. And that's the other thing, you know, there's plenty of languages where people have brought them back purely from academic or archived material. It's just not easy. And then the other question is, are we sure that you're saying it correctly? There's no way to tell, you know. But if there's like little phrases that they would say, little jokes and funny things that really had context to it all, you're not getting that because you're just purely focusing on the words. And I noticed that in Autumn as well. You know, some of the Autumn jokes, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess. You know, they're cracking up, and I'm like, oh, that was a little funny, I guess. You know, so you know, it's missing that context. But yeah, so like one example was a singer. He was singing and he started messing up, and in Autumn he said, I'm going off the road, he said. And then another Autumn guy over there started laughing really hard, old Autumn speaker, and he said, like a car, he said, like a car did. And they said, yeah, and they started laughing. And I was like, and they told me what they were saying, and I was like, oh, that's funny, I guess. But yeah, so, no other questions? Next slide. And so again, you know, I touched a little bit on it as far as borrowed words. But one example of that would be the Spanish 8-piece bit piece, which is the reales, which is a silver 8-piece. This is where the concept of money for Autumn comes from, real. And so when the Spanish said reales, Autumn said real. And so that's where the whole concept of money, to this day, they use real as to identify money. And so there's lots of Spanish borrowed words because of the history of first contact with Autumn people. But also there's, you know, English borrowed words. One main one would be Mergan. That's when they first met the American people. They said, "Oh, American." They said, "Oh, Mergan."
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Next slide. And so another point I would like to touch on in closing is, like, you know, we're going to continue to see our language, not only within our community, but outside of our community. And this is one example of that, due to tribal partnership and tribes working with outside entities. In the city of Mesa, there's the formerly named Mesa Grande Cultural Park. This was over on Country Club, and I took a picture before they switched it out because I caught them when they were switching all these signs out. So this was the former sign. It's switched out now because of tribal partnership and really the Tribal Historic Preservation Office and the museum working with the city of Mesa, the mayor of Mesa, and the museum, the Arizona History Museum, Natural History Museum. They worked to change the name from Mesa Grande to Stirdak Muvarvaki. And so that's the name now. And so you go there, you'll see this on the outside. This is on Alma School. You drive up Alma School, you'll see this there. And I can't remember this road here, but there's a sign on there, and then the other one's over here on Country Club. And so Stirdak which is blue, green, mulvad, which is a fly or a bee, and then vaki, which is a ancestral mound or multi-story structure. One similar visible structure we can see today that represents a vaki is a Casagrande ruins. In Autumn we call it a Sivanavaki. And so blue flies, ancestral home or house. And so now again to the example, the point that I made, this is outside of our community, but it's around us. So you're gonna see these. You're gonna see this is an Alvarez Hale Orthography. The hope is that in practicing on your own this orthography, you'll be able to see signs like this and say, oh, sound it out. Oh, okay. You may not know what it's saying, but you can definitely go home and go through your dictionary or ask a friend. Next slide. And then this is over at the legal services. They incorporated this into their wall there. And I was just there and I was like, hey, whoa, can I get a picture of that? That's pretty cool. I'm really enjoying seeing more of our language around our community. But the problem is that no one knows how to say it. I read it at least. And so even speakers themselves, we need training within the Alvarez Hale Orthography to understand what these symbols mean, how to read these things. And so that's the other point that brings me to is oftentimes speakers will write things phonetically. So even be open-minded on that end. They're writing it how it sounds. So you may even come across that out there, different books and signs and different things. The elder wrote it out for somebody and then they put it out. And so we have Vahajit York, speak for you or speak for them. Da Shogit, to speak clearly or to make something clear for somebody. Avum Chikbun, to work together with you. Okay? And so that was the last slide. So any questions before we close up? Before I release you to have the rest of your name? All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.